Crisis and Final Crisis. As we talked about before, right, the original Crisis event, Crisis on Infinite Earths, that basically got rid of the multiverse. That Infinite Crisis brought it back, and Final Crisis made the heroes aware of it. But here's an important distinction to understand here, that when the multiverse returned during the events of Infinite Crisis, it was not the multiverse the way it existed before the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, from a publishing perspective, DC did this because what it did is it allowed them to bring back the characters from the original multiverse, but basically modify their origins a little bit, or modify their characters a little bit, or something along those lines. It wasn't like DC saying, like, the multiverse is back, just like it was before Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was basically DC saying, the multiverse is back, now let's tell our stories. And for years and years and years, this was not really a major talking point among the characters within DC Comics, with the exception of a few. Psycho Pirate is one of those. And this is an important thing, because what he says is, the multiverse is real. You and I both know that, and yet those words made people on Earth Zero think I was nuts. They locked me up, threw me in Arkham for years. Instead of listening to me, helping me, they hid the truth. My world was the original Earth 2, the one before the first big crisis. When the multiverse was recreated, my Earth 2 no longer existed, replaced by a brand new fancy one. How do you think that made me feel? Now, of course, this is him talking, but this is one of the things that I want to explain here, right? He says, now you don't know what happened to me, what happened to you, do you? Your world deemed no longer necessary a thing of the past. We've seen it happen again and again, right? Every time there is some crisis, someone gets hurt. So much heartbreak and horror, it's tragic. Then heroes of Earth Zero celebrate the win. But because of the restart, they don't even remember what they are missing. And you know it will happen. And you have to ask, is my world next? Now, Darkseid offered us a deal. If you follow my very simple instructions, Darkseid will guarantee your world is protected, away from that dangerous Earth Zero. But someday I will call on you to back me up. And when I call, you better come running. But hopefully everything goes according to plan, and it never comes to that, right? Now here's the importance of this opening statement by Psycho Pirate, because unless you're familiar with the multiverse, and really with a lot of what happened in DC on the multiversal level, this whole thing is lost on you. So again, reiterating here, where Infinite Crisis brought the multiverse back, what Psycho Pirate is saying here is that the version of Earth 2 that came back after the events of Infinite Crisis was not the original Earth 2 the way it was depicted in Flash of Two Worlds back in 1961 or whatever it was. It's not that version of Earth 2. Instead, it was a modified and reworked version of Earth 2 for the modern era. Psycho Pirate is one of the only characters in existence in all of DC Comics who not only came from an alternate reality before the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, but remembers everything as it was before the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. He never forgot. Now, let's... tie Doomsday Clock into this, because I imagine a lot of people are kind of like, okay, so I thought Doomsday Clock fixed all of that, and it kind of did. And so the way that worked, right, to kind of tie all this together and gave you guys this bit of a story in terms of how things happen and what the story is going to change it, is that if the original Crisis event killed the multiverse, Infinite Crisis brought it back, Final Crisis made the heroes aware of it, then the way Flashpoint was originally written, it was Barry Allen going back in time to save his mom's life. And in doing that, he inadvertently, like, totally reworked or restarted the entirety of the Earth Zero universe, basically the main DC universe. And so in order to ensure things go back to the way they were supposed to, in the original Flashpoint event, they went back and let his mom die. When he came back, what DC did is they used that as a way to basically consolidate all the different storytelling brands they had. So Wildstorm and Vertigo and all that stuff into the main DC universe. And that gave us the New 52 relaunch in 2011. Doomsday Clock came back and then modified that yet again by basically saying what had actually happened is everything hadn't actually gone the way it was. But what Dr. Manhattan did is he prevented Jay Garrick from coming into existence. And with Jay Garrick basically no longer existing or having been killed in a train crash, then in turn, there was no JSA. And because there was no JSA, the Justice League, as it would traditionally form, didn't necessarily happen that way. That, along with a few other things, basically led to Manhattan removing memories or an entire history from the minds of DC superheroes. The nature of Doomsday Clock, Dr. kind of as you're reversing those actions, as well as death metal recreating the multiverse or restructuring it, basically saw those memories returning back to superheroes. But one of the things that I want to specify here is that the restoration of all those memories from before the New 52, right? The idea that they remembered their whole histories, all they really remembered was everything after the original Crisis on Infinite Earths event, going forward into like the New 52 and the relaunch and all that stuff. None of them remember anything from before the original Crisis. That's the important thing, and that's what's being said here, is that that original multiverse, as it was existed, or at least as it existed, and as it was destroyed, only Psycho Pirate remembers. So that's really an important distinction to understand here. Having said all that, the way this does, or at least what this does, is it picks up on Earth Omega. Now remember, Earth Omega is a world that exists out there, and I've kind of waited up to this point to basically research this. If you guys follow our coverage of Infinite Frontier number 0, which DC launched shortly after the death metal event, then what that did is it told us that Earth Omega was a world that Darkseid was effectively imprisoned. He was locked away by the Outcasts. He ultimately destroyed them, and then whatever happened happened. This is basically the follow-up. And so here on Earth Omega, this is where Darkseid reigns. It's where Darkseid rules basically everything. But there's also a much bigger force at play here than were initially being shown. And so of course you have Cameron Chase who wakes up here on this world, and of course ends up coming across Bones. Now of course it's basically Bones returning back to the villain that we knew, the old JSA, Alan Scott villain, and so on and so forth. So just kind of him going back to the way things used to be. Of course, Alan Scott and his son Obsidian have also arrived here on the scene to try to find their daughter Jade. Of course, they're reunited with Jade, so the family's kind of all here, basically wrapping up the plot thread of their story over the course of this. And one of the things that's talked about here is that because of the nature of Earth Omega, and because it is basically a prison planet that can't simply just be left on a whim, the only ways to leave this world are either by way of the ships that were used to get here, which are basically destroyed, or the Flash bearing out. Now, the Flash, of course, can do this by vibrating from one universe to the next. The problem is they don't know of a Flash that can do that because Barry Allen's missing, only for them to realize that Barry Allen is there, but he's being used as a means to power a gigantic device that exists out there, very similar to the way he was used during the original Crisis event. So this is one of those wild things, because in the midst of all this, suddenly you have Roy Harper who shows up here. Now, we are going to get an explanation of how it was that Roy Harper came back. It's going to be a little haphazard and just sort of thrown in there, but it serves its purpose. And in all honesty, we don't necessarily need a great big huge full-on explanation. Instead, what you end up getting is Cameron Chase asking the question of Extra. Right, again, this person that works for Bones is able to kind of jump in and jump out of different places, literally extract people from locations. Then Cameron Chase asks the question, who are you and why are you here? Right, you're like the thorn that's constantly been here in everybody's side. Only for Extract to remove her helmet and reveal she's actually Cameron Chase, the original Cameron Chase from the original Earth 2, way back in the day, before the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. And so it's kind of crazy that what you're basically getting here is these various individuals that are from the original multiverse that existed before the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. So I hope you're kind of picking up what's going on here. That what we effectively have are two multiverses going on, because as you guys know, in a multiverse, there's only one Earth 2, right? There are worlds out there that are similar to Earth 2, but there's only one world that's actually named Earth 2, which means if this version of Cameron Chase does not come from the modified version of Earth 2 post-Crisis, after the events of Infinite Crisis, then it means she has to come from the